Today I decided to give you guys a ranking of the MONSTERVERSE films. This is a series of films that began in 2014 and has been ongoing ever since. The film primarily focuses around the character of Godzilla as well as King Kong. Other monsters do appear throughout the series, such as Mothra, Rodan, Ghidorah, and Mechagodzilla. And these films do range from relatively serious to downright goofy. I've always enjoyed these films, although I do think some of them are a bit lacking. So without further ado, I decided to give you guys my ranking from worst to best. Starting with Godzilla, King of the Monsters. The third entry into this series. This is the sequel to the 2014 Gareth Edwards Godzilla film. This one was the first sign that the series was going to go from being relatively serious kaiju films and turning into what I would consider over-the-top action films. This time around, the action is definitely amped up in the first film. Most people's complaints about the first Godzilla film was there wasn't enough Godzilla or monster action, so this film really gives fans what they want in that regard. Problem is, the monster action here is not nearly as good as it was in the first film. It's kind of a situation of quality over quantity. Yes, there wasn't a lot of monster action in one, but here you have way too much of it, and it doesn't hit quite as hard. I still do like a lot of aspects of this film, but I also don't care for some of the more sci-fi aspects, which actually would increase as the series went along, such as the giant aircraft carrier that doesn't exist in real life, and the completely made-up machine that draws the monsters to you. A lot of good actors here, including Millie Bobby Brown and Vera Farmiga, just to name a few, but ultimately this one is a letdown in terms of quality story, and the action is just a little too goofy in this one. It does have some fun monster action, but definitely the weakest in terms of story. Up next is Godzilla X Kong, The New Empire. The sequel to Godzilla vs. Kong, this film basically shows the two titans teaming up to fight a new threat, this giant red ape and his, you could say, imprisoned ice giant lizard monster companion. It's a bit out there and a bit goofy, but this one does kind of just lean into the goofiness, which I do respect more. Whereas King of the Monsters kind of just tiptoes at it, this one says, hey, look, this is a sci-fi movie now. We're going to the center of the earth. The Skull Island girl from the first Godzilla vs. Kong is now a god, and there's going to be weird electrical powers and energy readings and giant apes just as big as Kong, and it's going to be a whole thing, and it's crazy and over the top, and I kind of like it. The film is not super serious. It even has a scene of Kong getting a fake tooth put in a giant dentistry scene, and there's a scene of him getting a giant robotic glove to help him fight. And the whole thing is just like a Power Rangers episode. But I like Power Rangers, so it's kind of appropriate. Fun for what it is, but definitely the series has lost the plot as far as being serious goes. And unfortunately, this is probably the direction the series is going from this point. But I do like some dumb, schlocky action, and that's what this is. It's kind of hard to be mad at this one. It's fun and a bit one note, but still a decent time. I really struggled with my number 3 spot, and it's between two films, and I ultimately had to go with Kong Skull Island. Kong Skull Island, I think, is just a really good balance of not only good action, but also pretty good spectacle without delving into the crazy over-the-top sci-fi nature of the films that would follow it. This time we see a new version of King Kong living on Skull Island when a research team goes to find out about the island, and along the way, all hell breaks loose when giant monsters start attacking the team, mostly comprised of Vietnam vets who have just finished fighting in the war and now have to fight another war against monsters. The cast is pretty good this time around. You got Brie Larson, as well as Tom Hiddleston and Samuel L. Jackson, not to mention John Goodman as well. It's probably the most star-studded cast of this series. And while I do enjoy most of them, I think some of them are a little bit wasted here. For instance, I don't really think Samuel Jackson is really doing a whole lot here. He's an okay antagonist, I guess like a human antagonist, but he just doesn't really go all out like he does in many other movies, and I think he's a little bit underutilized. Brie Larson and Tom Hiddleston are fine as leads, but I don't really know why they went all out with such expensive leads when they could have just replaced them with anybody, because this is kind of a one-and-done film as far as the cast goes. The movie takes place in the 1970s, and they're not going to go back to this era. At least it doesn't seem like it. So it just is a bit baffling why you would go so big with the cast on something that was basically a one and done. But I digress. The film is still pretty fun. It's relatively lighter than the first Godzilla movie, but not so much as the second Godzilla film. And it has some really good action. Skull Island looks really cool. There's a lot of nice creatures. It's not my favorite version of Skull Island, but it's definitely not the worst. And I really think that the island was well utilized, but unfortunately it was more or less destroyed in the sequel, so we won't be seeing it again. It is cool to have a Kong in the 1970s once again, which is also my favorite Kong, which was the 1976 King Kong film, also took place in the 1970s, obviously. So it's kind of cool to see them go back to that era with a Kong that very much resembles my favorite Kong. Entertaining film, and if you like King Kong, you won't be disappointed with this one. But if you were hoping for something a little bit more serious or something that had the tone of the original Godzilla, you won't really find it here. But this is a nice in between. Not too silly like the later films, but not overly serious and slow like the first Godzilla film. A nice middle ground and very entertaining. Which leads us to number 2, Godzilla 2014. This film had potential, and I really do enjoy it, but it also has some flaws. But let's get into the positive first. I would have to say that the film is really good looking. Despite being 11 years old, the effects are still really great and hold up. The acting by Bryan Cranston is superb, and he was the best part of the film. But that also leads to things that I don't like about the film, which would have to be that Bryan Cranston, the best character, gets killed off in the first act. Aaron Taylor Johnson pretty much becomes the main character after the first act, and he plays Bryan Cranston's son in the movie, and he's pretty underwhelming. His wife is played by Elizabeth Olsen, who a year later would star as Scarlet Witch, and he would play Quicksilver, and there would be siblings in that movie, which kind of makes this movie kind of gross in hindsight, but I digress. The problem with this one is that there's just not enough action. The action that we do see in the film is superb. We get a pretty cool sequence of these monsters awakening in the first act. We get a really awesome final battle sequence towards the end of the movie, and a really slow middle section. Ken Watanabe is in the film as well as a researcher who tries to prevent them from using nuclear weapons against the monster due to the effects of what happened in World War II to the Japanese, and he's an interesting character. But unfortunately, he's the only other good character in the movie, I think, besides Bryan Cranston, and everyone else is kind of a dud here. The action that is there is great, the cinematography is great, and I like that they took the film serious. I think just because the movie's about monsters doesn't mean that you can't have fun with it while also giving it the serious nature that it can deserve. But unfortunately, this is the last time in the series that they really played it straight, and everything after this was kind of tongue-in-cheek. I really do like this one. It just has kind of a slow middle act, and it needed a stronger cast and better action, but I do like it for what it is, and it is a solid, if not a little bit unremarkable, Godzilla film with a strong finale. And that leads me to number 1, which would have to be Godzilla vs. Kong. Now, while this film is silly, and while this film is over the top and definitely tongue-in-cheek, this film is a freaking blast. I love the action in this movie. It actually rivals the original Godzilla film, only there's way more of it. The cast is stacked pretty well this time around. You got Millie Bobby Brown, again, from the second Godzilla film. But it's really all about the monsters this time around, and the action is just spectacular. Watching Godzilla and Kong fight on the big screen was just a treat, and something that I'd never really thought I'd see, apart from the 1960s film. So this was actually pretty damn interesting. Everything about it was superb this time around. The characters are fun. The premise is really entertaining. I really like how they use Ghidorah to power Mechagodzilla, and them teaming up at the end to kick Mechagodzilla's ass is just a really good treat. The film is just unapologetic fun. I do miss the serious nature of the first Godzilla movie, and I wish they would at least return to that in some way or form. But I can't deny, when you just deliver this kind of fun spectacle, it's hard not to put a smile on my face. Very enjoyable, really entertaining, and if you like good, fun action, you're going to love this one. Fortunately, I don't know if they're ever going to return to the heights of this film as far as pure entertainment goes, but if they ever do, I'll gladly accept it with open arms. So that's my list. I do thank y'all for watching. I really do enjoy the MONSTERVERSE, but I do think that it's kind of losing some steam, and I think maybe it is a bit played out. It'd be cool if they maybe made like a Gamera movie to throw in more monsters here, because I did think this idea could expand even further, but it seems to be a little bit stagnant at the moment. Still an enjoyable series nonetheless, and of the 5 movies, I definitely recommend most of them, and the only weak one I would say would have to be Godzilla King of the Monsters, but even that is enjoyable still. Your list down below, or just tell me your favorite of this series, or tell me whether you prefer Godzilla or Kong. I thank y'all for watching, and peace out.